Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. My name is Steven, and this is the Storytime channel. Today we have some malicious compliance stories, and our first story of the day is by Rando Boomer. Company requires using our airline miles for work trips. Another fun story of an obnoxious boss. As I've mentioned in other posts, I used to travel a lot for business, between 30 and 35 weeks a year. Our boss was a frequent traveler as well, and taught us the tricks of the trade for accumulating frequent flyer miles, and especially status, a really great perk. Eventually, he retired and sold the company to the new boss. New boss overheard that I had over 500,000 frequent flyer miles with my airline, not credit card points, and said he should implement a new policy that we had to use our personal frequent flyer miles for our business travel, since the company had paid for our trips. That weekend, my wife and I sat down and booked weekend trips all over the country over the next year. Boston for clam chowder? Check. New York City for a Broadway show? Check. Garlic Fest in Gilroy, California? A real and delicious thing, by the way. Check. By Monday morning, my airline frequent flyer mile account was down to about 15,000 miles. Later that week, it was time to book a trip, and he said I had to use frequent flyer miles. I brought up my account and showed him I didn't have enough miles. He asked where they went, and when I said I had booked some trips, he demanded I redeposit the miles. I pointed out there was a $150 charge per person, and that since it wasn't policy, I wasn't going to pay it. Pissed, he announced going forward that we needed approval for personal use of our personal frequent flyer miles. Okay, boss, you bet. My next step was to spread my flights over any and every airline I could find to prevent accumulating the 20,000 miles required to redeem for a free ticket. I was on United, Frontier, American, Delta, Northwest, Continental, US Air, Southwest, etc. At one point, I think I booked a trip on the Mrs. Grace L. Ferguson Airline and Storm Door Company. Google it, it's a Bob Newhart routine, and more true now than when he performed it 60 years ago. He eventually figured out what I was up to, and he lost what little patience remained for me. Then the following, paraphrased, took place. I suppose you think you're a smart guy. No, I know I'm a smart guy. Don't get cute. No, I'm smart. Cute is just a bonus. Look, I see my wife about 10 days a month. I live out of a suitcase. I know the aircraft evacuation speech by heart. Most of my meals are handed to me through a window. And thanks to my willingness to do this, you make hundreds of thousands of dollars. Can you please just let me keep the only perk I get from all this? Boss thought about it for a bit, grunted, "Fine, keep your miles," and walked away. Let me ask you guys. Do you think demanding that your employees use their personal frequent flyer miles for their employment should be illegal to demand for? Let me know in the comments down below. This next story is by Mom Tired Send Wine. Boss demands a strict dress code. I'm a teacher, been teaching for close to 15 years. The first school I taught at was horrible. I loved my students, but the principal was horrible. It should have been a red flag that I was hired after her first year at the school, and she had like 30 plus spots to fill out of 110 staff. A ton of people jumped ship because of how bad she was. Not going to lie, the school was tough. We had trouble with gangs, drugs, fights, pregnancies, and it was just a school for 7th and 8th grade. There were some kids that were harder to reach because they were reacting to things the only way they knew. I would have easily still been there today 14 years later if it wasn't for that principal. I should also say that I am a white woman. The school had 1,100 kids in it. Out of the 1,100, there were only 11 white kids. Out of the 110 staff, there were maybe 10 white staff members. Most of the kids were Hispanic or African American. Majority of the staff were African American as well, including the principal. I was some of the kids' first exposure to a white person. So the principal, who was a bully to students, staff, and parents, systematically took away everything away that was positive from the kids in school. The kids had to be in uniforms, but on Fridays they could wear jeans with their uniform shirt. She did away with that. She took away pep rallies. She took away field day. She once told us to be quieter while cheering for our kids at a soccer game. The 8th graders would get a dance at the end of the year. She took that away. A group of my girls wrote a letter asking her why did she take the dance away from everyone, even the kids who don't get into trouble and follow the rules, and why not just tell the kids who get into trouble that they can't come. They were too scared to ask her in person and too scared to give her the letter themselves. They asked me to give her the letter. When I tried, she refused to take it from me, saying, "If they have something to say to me, they can give it to me themselves." One year, Halloween fell on a Friday. At the beginning of the month when we had our staff meeting, she made it very clear that we were not allowed to wear a costume of any kind. Throughout the month, she sent multiple emails reminding us that costumes were not allowed. I show up that Friday in a dress that has a giant flower print all over it. I don't normally wear dresses. I'd gone to a hobby store and gotten 2 giant fake flowers and made them into earrings. I also got a giant red beehive wig. Voila! Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus. I'm a science teacher. She calls me into her office. This is pretty much our conversation. "Miss X, were you at the faculty meeting in blah date?" She has the sign-in sheet sitting in front of her, so she knows I was there. I say yes. "Did you see my emails about no costumes?" I say, "I did." "Did you understand the emails where I said no costumes?" "I did." "Why are you wearing a costume?" "I'm not." I can tell by this point she is incredibly angry. She gestures towards me. "Then what is that?" "A dress, not a costume." "What is on your head?" I feign ignorance and touch my head. "Oh, this? Are we not allowed to wear wigs? Are you going to tell the staff?" She herself was wearing a wig that day that I'd heard her brag about. Oh, she was pissed, but couldn't do a darn thing. All she did was tell me to get out of her office. I'm pretty sure if she was going to try and enforce that rule, there would be some pretty big ethics questions being raised. Imagine being this heartless and this soulless that for kids that are going through school, young kids too, they're talking about like 8th grade in that range here, you're trying to take away every fun little benefit they could possibly have. No field day, no dances. You take that away from the kids, you just suck as a human being. Our next story is also by Rando Boomer. No keeping per diem money, no receipts, equals no reimbursement. A couple decades ago, I traveled a lot for business, between 30 and 35 weeks a year. Initially, I looked forward to the bromance of travel, only to discover it was endless awakenings feeling like the Rohypnol had just started to wear off. But I digress. I had a really great boss who gave us a standard meals per diem. I think it was $30 per day. This worked great for me. I'd grab the complimentary continental breakfast in the lobby, typically be too busy to eat lunch, and grab something from Subway on the way back to the hotel. Not the healthiest way to live, but it added up to an extra $100 plus per week. Eventually, he sells the company to a new boss. I return from a trip and submit my per diem request. He denies it. And since I didn't keep the receipts, I had to pay for all my own meals on that trip. I explain the previous arrangement and ask if we could do it that way. He tells me, "No, if you don't have a receipt, you don't get reimbursed." He drafted and printed the policy. 3 meals a day, no more than a 15% tip, no room service, no snacks, no desserts, no alcohol. Okay, have it your way. My next trip was to the Bay Area of California, which was insanely overpriced then too. I decided I would follow the new policy to the letter. We all know that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, so steak and eggs is the smart way to start the day in the nearby 4-star hotel. Realizing I wasn't getting enough steak and lobster in my diet, I went for the surf and turf special for dinner. And since I wouldn't have time for lunch the next day, another to go please, kind sir. It was a glorious week of finding the most expensive things I could both A, pronounce and B, eat. I returned to the office and submitted my expenses, with receipts of course. Instead of $150 that week, the company wrote me a check for over $700. The new boss quickly rescinded that policy, allowing me my $30 per diem again, and I could keep what I didn't use. Honestly, this new boss sounds like they suck. I guess what can you really expect from a standardized boss like that? Somebody that doesn't really care too much about comfort or enjoyment in your job really? I'd have been pretty darn annoyed. And our final story of the day is by Conman Connors. You're not a team player? As you wish. This story is a couple years old, and like many things on the internet, you wait for the heat to die off to reduce the chance of recognition by the parties involved. I've seen a lot of malicious compliance posts against managers. This is one of a manager complying with employee demands. I was leading a team of technicians that included an on-call component. Every 4 to 6 weeks, it was your turn on the roster to carry the phone and be available 24/7. You could live your life normally, but we advise techs not to plan a family event they can't leave unexpectedly, or a weekend trip more than an hour or two away from the office while on call. If you wanted to change the schedule, you needed a colleague to volunteer to swap. The roster was generated a few months in advance, and we had a very firm rule after being burned a couple times. No change is permanent until it's confirmed in the schedule. Meaning myself or my supervisors have received a written confirmation from both parties. People have a tendency to change plans, so we made sure the team knew the bare minimum was an email from both techs agreeing to the change. Then we update the schedule, then it is locked in stone. There are a few players to this melodrama. Me, the manager of all the teams in the area, my supervisor for Bob's team, Henry, the tech receiving malicious compliance, Bob, and the young tech who got screwed out of a weekend, Jim. Jim wants to attend a concert on a weekend he's scheduled to be on call. Jim successfully convinces Bob over lunch to swap with him and sends us an email to confirm. Very important to note that Henry and a few others are eating lunch with them. Henry hears the whole conversation. Bob does not reply with his acceptance, so there's no changes made at that time, and everyone goes home for the day. When Bob eventually came clean, I learned what happened next. Bob mentions to his wife that evening, the week on call, he will swap with him. Bob's wife is not happy with this and points out she wants to see her mother that weekend, so she demands he swaps back. Normally, if Bob had confirmed the change, it would be 100% his job to find a volunteer to take over. But Bob realizes he never agreed via email, so he decides to play sneaky. He was a bit of a macho kind of guy, so I think a lot of what happened next was based on avoiding the appearance of his wife telling him what to do. The next day, Bob responds in writing that there actually was not an agreement and he wouldn't take the shift. Taking everyone by surprise is the fact he didn't frame it as, "Actually, I can't take that shift," but instead went with, "Jim is lying, I never said that." Jim is upset he'll miss his concert, but per the rules, he is out of luck. There's suddenly tension in the office and techs taking sides between Bob and Jim. Not a great situation for esprit de corps, so it's time for management to get involved. Henry wants to handle it, but he's a bit too riled up, so I pull Bob aside instead. I ask Bob what's going on, hint that multiple people have upheld Jim's version of events. Is there something we can do here to ease the tension? I'm asking you to be a team player here and come clean for me. You don't have to take the shift, but I don't like when techs are mudslinging each other. "No," says Bob, "Jim is a liar and the rest of them must have heard it wrong or they're lying too. I never agreed to this and I don't want to be a team player with these liars." I say, "You don't want to be a team player. Is that right?" Bob says, "Yes. I'm just going to look out for myself since I can't trust these young guys on the team like Jim." I say, "Whatever you say, Bob." Cue the malicious compliance. For the rest of the year, every time Bob needed a hand, he was left hanging, within reason. I'm not risking my own performance numbers here. Difficult job that would be easier with two? Sorry, Bob. All the older team members are scheduled elsewhere. You'll have to do it alone since you don't trust these younger techs. Bob wants a hand moving some equipment to the delivery van? Sorry, the team is busy with other tasks. I'm sure you can handle it solo. Bob got the picture pretty quick that severing himself from the team was a bad idea, but from stubbornness or machismo, he stuck it out and refused to come clean or stop glaring at the newer team members. Evidently, to preserve his version of events, he had to maintain an air of distrust for the younger techs, or he just blamed them collectively, I don't know. That carried on until the end of the year reviews came around. In our office, you could pick a few personal objectives, and this was a great way to get a good review even if we had a bad year. For example, some people set educational goals and got a new certificate or two in the company e-learning portal which, if achieved, would lift their average performance score. Bob, in his infinite wisdom, had listed a few personal objectives that were remarkably social in nature. Teamwork was one. Sharing knowledge with new team members was another. These were pretty good objectives for an older, more experienced tech who could lend a hand to teammates and get some positive feedback to show his bosses by the end of the year. These were not good objectives to have when you very clearly stated you are not a team player and have been working almost completely solo for half the year. The fallout: Bob took a pretty big hit on his performance scores that year. It lowered his bonus by a few $100, and for the first time in years, there were no glowing reviews by colleagues that he could use to his advantage. Not to mention his own words being thrown back in his face on all his personal objectives. I had Henry signal me quietly as the meeting was winding down so I could drop by and add my 2 cents. To a very crestfallen Bob, I asked, "Still feeling like you don't want to be a team player, Bob? We missed your old self these past few months." Bob takes a moment to respond and then starts laughing. He shakes his head a bit and answers, "You're right, I do miss being a team player. Things got a little out of hand. I think I'll focus on that for next year." I told him I was glad to hear it, gave a wink to Henry, and their meeting continued in a much more positive note after I left. The whole saga had taken 6 months, but in the end, Bob apologized to Henry for lying. The next week, Bob took Jim out for lunch, and he spent the next year being the absolute gold star example of a team player. I spent some political capital arguing with HR and was able to give him a raise at his next review in recognition of his efforts. It's nice that OP was willing to reward them for finally being able to admit their faults and willing to work on what they needed to improve. It feels a little weird rewarding them after spending all that time being that stubborn, but I get it. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So if you have a favorite story of the day, let me know which story and why in the comments down below. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, and if you haven't, subscribe and turn notifications on so you'll never miss an upcoming video. No matter what you do, whether it's just viewing the video, liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, I appreciate the heck out of it. Every little thing that you do helps the channel grow that much more, and I can't thank you enough for it. So until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll be right here next time on the Storytime channel.